My name is Jennifer Franklin. I'm the program director of the Hudson Valley Writers Center. I'm so happy to have all of you here today. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank NYSCA and Arts Westchester for their support. I want to thank Sophia and Misty and Christina for all of their help in making this happen today. And I want to thank all of our poets for driving quite a long way to be here to read for all of you. We have Oliver from Worcester. We have Michael, who, did you come in from Vermont? Yeah. And so you win. And we have Margaret, who came from Princeton. So really thank you for driving all this way for reading. Okay, Margaret Ray grew up in Gainesville, Florida, and holds an MFA from Warren Wilson College. She is winner of Third Coast Poetry Prize and a chapbook fellowship from the Poetry Society of America for her chapbook Superstitions of the Mid-Atlantic, which was chosen in 2020 by Jericho Brown. Her poems have appeared in most of the best journals in the country. Selected by Stephanie Burt as the winner of the Pullen Junior Poetry Prize, Margaret Ray's Good Grief the Ground interrogates the everyday violences nonchalantly inflicted onto women through personal, political, and national lenses. Moving between adolescence and adulthood, she alternates between dark humor, which we really need right now, and heart-wrenching honesty to explore grief, anxiety, queer longing, girlhood, escape from a bad marriage, haven't we all? And the dangers of lending language to a thing. With stunning wit and precision of attention, we see Ray show us what it is to be human, the mess of tenderness and darkness and animosity. Please, all of you, help me welcome Margaret Ray.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Feels kind of really trivial to read some of these poems right now, but they're what I have. So this is called Late and Soon. It's after a poem by Cameron Awkward Rich. Late and soon. Oh, it is good to be among the living, buying the things the living buy, doing things to get money, and waiting for traffic lights to change. Yes, it is good that there are things to want and things to want to eat. Deli meats and soft cheeses. Bring them with you to another apartment where someone else lives. There's the matter of picking a place to live. The storms, yes. The heat, sure. The fires, okay. But it is good, remember, good to sit behind the wheel of a car when you need to eat, to open the packages that arrive at your doorstep, good to watch the packaging go away in a truck. There are scissors for that, and a schedule, and words to say when someone reaches out to hand you a sandwich you paid for. I'm not betting on anything. I'm inoculating myself against hope, dipping myself in a vat of its opposite till it shines on me like a coat of lacquer. I walk out into the sun, gleaming. It is good. I am saved. That orphan glove on the sidewalk won't break my heart. It won't. I feel like all I'm doing these days is grieving various things and people. So I'm going to read a little series of grief poems and hope you will bear with me while I do. Archimedes, get out of the tub. Grief has made me stupid, and I forget to tell my class the important thing they must remember. I cannot remember what a dongle is for, and words I reach for take off like birds from a fence post. I want to pour my life into a different container, but it's still river water. Reverse boatman, suggests my students helpfully. You have a new memory, says my phone. Eureka, says the shape of the space inside me. Peaches, for Anita. Everything has intentions of its own, even this knife. A knife's intention is to cut, which is what I am using it for, cutting this peach into underripe wedges, because either patience or flies come next. So here is the knife, filling my hand with intent so full I almost cut my thumb across the 2-year-old scar of just such intentions. The pit into the plastic trash bag where it will rot unproductively. We're not doing our best. Intending to help, your phone keeps suggesting you add your mother to emails. Not good enough. not good enough to have taken her silence for absence. The peach isn't good, but can you imagine? Next year, there may be peaches again. This one is one I've never actually read out loud. I'm going to try to go for it here. It's a longer prose poem. It's called Memory Palace. Build yourself a palace in the mind. Name the entrance hall for your sister and in it place your area code, zip code, your mother's phone number. In the drawing room, place the faces of your students. Sketch them in pencil so they can age, so you can still find their names on the tip of your tongue years later. In the British Isles, one consequence of massive drought is that old land scars become visible again from the sky. Ancient divots made by long-gone huts and stone circles collect slightly more water in the soil, and those patches spring up greener than the parched surroundings. What you see from above is a green outline of a memory. I worry a lot about memory, but it's stored all around us. My mother, her father, deep in dementia. He would come back to himself only while listening to music, suddenly call her by name after months of thinking she was his sister. No, leave the stereo on. Turn it up. Have you pried open your electronics lately? Have you seen the switchboards? Miniature landscapes of order and design, tiny cities out the plane window, so much mysterious surrounding green, copper wiring carrying more than you'll ever know. Did I tell you about the graveyard I pass on my runs? Right there, smack in the middle of those fields, a mile from the river, most of the headstones so weathered there's nothing left to read. And this in America, where we dance on so many graves. American surnames erase. Whole columns of women disappear from the record under the editing pen of marriage, or bear the name of their great-great-grandmother's enslaver. Some of the mansions still stand. You can pay to enter them, or to be married on the grounds, dancing. Already my students born in the early 2000s don't remember a time before the internet. There are dead-end web pages out there in the ether, ghost places frozen as last left, their maintainers absent like a clockwork god. You can stumble on them like ruins, hermetically sealed rooms. Imagine an eternal surveillance camera in a cave, a flurry of human activity. Imagine it sped up, people racing in and out with torches, hands on the walls, dancing, shapes and lines appearing, bison and lion, horses, handprints, then nothing for 30,000 years. Silence and darkness. And the last 2 seconds of the tape would show two modern cavers stumbling in, having rolled aside the landslide's work, holding up a flashlight, falling to their knees. An alien en route to Earth would first hear our voices 113 light years away as radio waves. We will sing into the dark, I think, until darkness is all there is. I say a little prayer, 294 trillion miles away and counting. All right, here's one of my sort of very trivial seeming high school poems. Poems about high school, not written in high school. Those have not survived, thank goodness. Hail Mary. The gym at the rural high school, 45 minutes outside of town. No AC, just the giant fans set in the walls rotating lazily like B-52 propellers warming up on the runway, slicing up the sunlight as it hits the hardwood floor. Smell of dust and resin in the humid Florida afternoon. In the locker room was where Jay told me she was more than a week late and worried she was pregnant. Then she got 8 rebounds, though she was no taller than me and played wing. And I thought about it every time I saw her take an elbow in the gut. I had always been the one who watched her, not sure what it was I was looking for, strong and fearless under the rim, the way she'd throw her body to the floor for a loose ball. And that day she became, for me, a goddess as she sat sweating on the locker room bench at halftime, elbows on her knees, a glow of danger and ferocity pulsing off her. I don't think she'd told anyone else, but she wouldn't let me catch her eye during the game, which we lost when their point guard hit a buzzer beater from half court. And on the bus back, she sat sleeping or pretending to sleep under her hood. Discman turned all the way up. The way our lives could bend around this thing, that knowledge grew between us, a blade we would have to carry later, mothering ourselves or anything that came along. The view from here. With other people's deaths, how everything has always arranged itself into before and after. You're a daughter until you're not. People like to tell me parenting is like this too, a fulcrum over which your life bends. Your life outside your body, in your arms. Her name is after. These points on a timeline, everything is the same, until one day you wake up and what you know your cells have known before you. It all sparkles with impermanence. There is golden grove unleaving, and you feel the most delicious tingling on your arm as it lowers the apple from your lips. The clearing. I treat happiness like the half-tamed deer I have coaxed into a clearing and want only to be near. If I look right at it, it will spook and disappear. Instead, I have to look studiously away, offering my mind permission to marvel only out of the furthest corner of my eye. If I reach out to it with a handful of something sweet, it will smell a trap and start away, flash of white tail into the underbrush. No sudden movements. I only want to look at you. Stay just long enough to let me look at you in the fading light. I'm gonna read a love poem, a little antidote. First, and then. We'd watched too much Battlestar Galactica in the weeks leading up to the big anniversary of the moon landing, so it seemed like a really minor deal when it came around, and all the news outlets and search engines couldn't let up about it. Truly impressive things happen every day here in the future, like the miracle of LASIK eye surgery gone right, and the lady down the street who microchipped her dog. Satellites clutter up the night sky, and we're still adding to the list of things that can kill us. But it is a good idea to keep thinking about how symbolic firsts are orchestrated. I couldn't very well have done anything other than carry myself across the threshold of my first apartment all those years ago, when happiness had seemed as far away as the moon, which it turned out was 2 days by rocket and also thousands of years of humanity staring into space. And anyway, carry becomes the wrong verb for anything other than attune in both zero gravity and self-sufficient womanhood. Whether we know it or not, the world has already handed us our lines for when we come to grief, though method acting is optional. Me, I've been gathering reports of people whose second lives have bent toward joy. Look at you, here in my life, the machine of the world that set us in orbit together. My astonishment undimmed by the daily sight of you entering a room, or the sound of your whistling carrying through the door. I'm going to read a couple of, this book has this thread of poems about a third person character named Wanda, who's a sort of aspirational alter ego. And I'm going to read a couple of those, if I can find the first one. Wanda is a particle physicist. Wanda sparkles with curiosity and competence, and no one underestimates her. The events of her day are unenraging as she moves through the physics building unmolested. Wanda works on things so small she has to take them on a kind of faith, knowing them only by disturbances they leave in the visible world. Visible, not quite the right word. Wanda's computer does what she tells it, while in a shaft of sunlight in her office, some dust motes float suspended. That she sees them is certain. They are real. She stares through sunlight, thinking how it is that love forms an outline of its object. Wanda looks back at the traces her particles have left, moving through a field. Wanda in the world. In the coffee shop near campus, Wanda sits with an undergraduate who tells her she finds the outdated technology of her own body ridiculous. She would prefer to be a mind downloaded on a fancy computer. That's the student's phrase, outdated technology. And Wanda remembers wanting to erase the leaky vessel in which she moves through the world. Now Wanda thinks of biting into a plum's taut skin and pizza labeled Lust auf Fleisch from the conference in Berlin last year. Wanda dwells deliciously on her own incarnateness, enmeated in the flesh, her urgent, near medical need to reach out and touch any textured surface, her lover's skin, velour, and sure, snakes. Wanda wants to pause and smile, sing the body to this student, but she knows it's really just her younger self she'd make her case to here today. And Wanda knows to let young people love the world in their own way. And this is the last one of those series. It's called At a Distance, and you need to know, you probably already know this, but that entanglement is a concept from quantum physics. It's a phenomenon in which particles remain connected so that their actions performed on one affect the other, even when separated by great distances. And supposedly this phenomenon so riled Albert Einstein that he called it spooky action at a distance. At a distance. Wanda leaves her nail polish in the photon lab for the 7th time this term. Redshift red, it's called, the color of receding. The Cavendish is cold this time of year, but news from the university at Delft is of entanglement. Even while she reads the memo, Wanda thinks instead of what a color knows of cues. Blue knows about announcements, like approaching light. In that other Delft school, how Vermeer's windows enunciate this daily miracle. Whispered assurances of how little we know, or what remains unsaid. A woman holding scales, receiving letters, or just attending to the milk and bread. And I thought I would read a couple brand new poems to finish. This one is called Wuthering Heights. My friend M is making a red painting about Kate Bush's music video, about Emily Bronte's novel, about what haunts. Now I am making a poem about my friend's painting. Quite obviously, the novel and music video are more stimulating than either our painting or poem. This is a case of dilution rather than enrichment. The sound I want to make is in my mouth like the sound of a bell without a clapper. Nonetheless, here we are, throwing whatever small talents we might have at the usual things: love, death, and other women's work. This is called The Condition of Music. One day, my student is crying. She has been listening to a song. It's so powerful. It's just so powerful. She coughs through her tears, blessedly unembarrassed, occasionally hiccuping, her face swollen. I do not ask what has filled her to the brim today. Whatever song it is has gotten between her and the world enough to pry the lid off something wordless. She sits on the floor, and I do not tell her art will be there for her all her life. I do not know if she sees her life is made of doors, music perhaps through most of them. You know how it is, I hope. You're in the middle of your life, and then gong, suddenly some music, a poem, and the crying that begins is like a belch at first, and you listen, astonishing and long, and it calls forth such sounds from you that you remember, my God, you're alive, and there is such a thing as song. And this is the last one I'm going to read. The Lesson. There was a joke I learned to play, a joke my friends used to play while we were walking, wandering around our hometown, in which the trailing person in the group would smack a stop sign or other metal street sign as hard as they could with a raised hand and yell, ow. While the others turned around to look, you, the joker, were supposed to be doubled over with your head in your hands, as if you'd hit your head on the sign, as if you were possibly that tall. I wasn't clear exactly who or what the joke was on, but I too executed it whenever I was the straggler, partly so I could reestablish myself as a speaking character in the group, but mostly because I could never shake the feeling of shame from when I had first fallen for this gag. Their laughter aimed at the earnest expression of worry on my face. I knew there was something terrible about this joke, that it belonged to a whole family of jokes that my generation seemed to be swimming in, whose lesson was about skepticism as a position of safety. and knee-jerk empathy as somehow, I couldn't see why, deeply embarrassing. You weren't supposed to be too credulous, I was learning. People could pull one over on you, manipulate your concern for them into a power they held over you. How terrible to learn that. Poison it was, I see now. That first evidence that even one person's suffering might be merely simulated, and that you might be a fool for believing.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I loved hearing those poems, especially the new ones. Michael Dumanis is the author of the poetry collections Creature from Four-Way Books, 2023, and My Soviet Union from University of Massachusetts Press, 2007, winner of the Juniper Prize for Poetry. He is also co-editor with poet Kate Marvin of the younger poets anthology Legitimate Dangers, American Poets of the New Century, published by Saraband in 2006, and with Kevin Proofer of Russell Atkins on the life and work of an American master from Pleiades in 2013. His poems have appeared in the best journals in the country. His writing has been recognized with residencies from the best residencies in the country and in Italy as well. The castle, as we like to call it in my house. And born in Moscow, Dumanis emigrated with his family at age of 5 and grew up in Western New York. He holds a BA from the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University, an MFA from the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, and a PhD in literature and creative writing from the University of Houston. He joined the Bennington faculty in fall 2012. In addition to being a member of the literature faculty, he serves as director of poetry at Bennington and editor of Bennington Review. Please, all of you, help me welcome Michael Dumanis.
Hi, everybody. Jennifer, thank you so much. I'm starting to lose my voice, but I think I'll power through it. I had a terrible reading in June in a big auditorium of MFA students at Bennington, where as soon as I got on stage, my voice went. Like completely went, and I powered through it, and that was probably a bad idea, but I think I'll be better. I think I'll be better today. So, Margaret, that was a wonderful reading, and Oliver, I look forward to hearing your poems, and really nice to see you again. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Some years ago now, there was an anthology of poems about perfume, and I get this email asking me to write one, and I don't know anything about perfume. And they said, if you write this anthology, we will send you a specific vial of perfume to inspire you, and you should smell this perfume. And so I said yes. Clouds. Because I was afraid of death, I hid my body in a cloud of vetiver and citron notes and thought I could persist forever as something burdening the air of any room I had to leave. I carved my name into a tree, forgetting that the tree would fall. Crossing the canvas as my paint peeled off me, I hollered music out of my small teeth. I thought I would outlast the weather. Here is one room I had to leave. Those are my diamond dust shoes in the corner. I am a dark shape on a video monitor. So, more banter. I live in Vermont now. I used to commute from the city to Vermont. I'm there permanently now. But before I had this job in Vermont, I lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was kind of miserable there. There was this moment where I went on a date in Cleveland, Ohio, and the only thing I knew about the person I was going on this date with is that she was a puppeteer. And there were about, I don't know, 3 or 4 very awkward minutes at the beginning of the date. And I said, so what are your puppets like? And she said, they're fully posable leather and clay creatures. One of them is an elephant wearing a fez. Yeah. Natural history. I'm fully posable, a leather and clay creature with the capacity to waltz and do the twist. My jaws unclench themselves. My eyes swing open. The world is young and I still have some years, so I take out a patent on slow-moving fog, take out a patent on the hyacinth. I brand the cow, trademark the coelacanth. Its tiny heart is shaped like a straight tube. However, the darkness keeps hitting me over the head with its hammer. I want to feel more substantial than an elephant wearing a fez. So I invent the theory of gravity. So I discover my larynx and use it. So I study yoga and learn how to wrap my legs around my neck, but I keep finding occasion to lie on the floor like a slug or weep into the rented furniture. So I invent the Bhagavad Gita. So I invent the Gutenberg Bible. So I invent the Etch-a-Sketch and draw myself a lover with the right proportions. We go on holiday and sit in traffic. I do my best not to erase her, not to shake things up. When we get lonely, we invent the baby, a fully posable leather and clay creature. It cries like a small bird. We pose with it. To never erase you, I carve your initials, my lover, into the spine of a tree. You are happy, but the tree dies. So I take out a patent on the synthetic tree, and I carve your initials, my lover, into its torso and take you to the disco and the roller derby, to the waterfall beside the paper mill. It's so amazing what we get to see. The ruins extend across the valleys toward each sea. So one more poem of Ohio. Um, I was living in Cleveland, and a friend of mine was teaching at a small college in West Virginia, and he said, "I can give you very little money for this reading, but if you could drive down, we'd be happy to have you at this college." And I looked at the map, and I thought, well, it looks like a pleasant enough, like 2.5 hour drive. You go straight down the spine of the state of Ohio, and then you have to go along the Ohio River. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I pictured this very picturesque, like beautiful, like drive along the Ohio River, and you have to drive through East Liverpool, Ohio, which I'm sure is fine for the people who live there, but has the largest toxic waste incinerator in the country. And as I was driving through it, and this has never happened to me before or since, driving through this like industrial, just like wasteland, and my windows are closed in my car, and my throat is burning, like completely burning from driving from the pollution in the city. East Liverpool, Ohio. I have abandoned plans I had to matter. My not conceived yet child, his anxious mother, the Lakeview timeshare with the Tiffany shade. In the motel room on the bald face of the mountain, I wrote in the margins of the contingency Bible, it moved me that she knew the names of trees. But who needs nature when the power plants are beautiful? Catalpa, catalpa, she said, common hackberry, cedar stump, pile of driftwood, American bladdernut, dwarf weeping pussy willow, hard pine, lacebark pine, pine, soft pine. My mouth has been stuck to the roof of my tongue. I keep forgetting to look up and be reminded by the moon that it's the moon I am supposed to marvel at. The night I paced the snow-fringed riverbank, watching the cadmium fuming from the Corinthian smokestacks, I heard the factory's breath whisper over the freeway, the way she used to say into my ear, I still exist, I still exist, I still exist, just one of her immeasurable failings. She wouldn't listen when I claimed the country had been replaced by a new country. Even after the unsigned postcard in our letterbox that read, I have decided not to commit suicide, don't worry. And the second unsigned postcard telling us, I have decided not to commit suicide, worry. After those, no more postcards. So, and I wanted to gloss that. There's a really amazing Japanese conceptual artist on Kawara who passed away maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And one of the various, he had a couple of different projects, and one of them was called the Today series, where to show that he was alive on a certain day, he would literally paint the numbers of the day. Like there's a few of these in Diabeacon, I think, not far from here, where he would paint the date to show that to prove that he was there. And he would also send postcards to people. And some of them would say, I still exist on Kawara, or they were signed, they're unsigned here. Or I woke up on Kawara, or I've decided not to commit suicide. Don't worry, or worry. Yeah. I have 2 children these days, and one of them is they're both wonderful kids, and one of them is 9 now. My son is 9, and he's lovely. And when he was a child, and I don't mean this glibly, like he was really quite violent, and I would hold him I would hold him in my arms, and he'd smile at me. He was a very cute baby, and his fingers were going straight for my eyes, right? Or like his mouth would be getting closer and closer to my hand, and I'd think, I know what you're about to do. So he's great. The Empire of Light. The baby pulls my wrist into his mouth. The baby wants to eat my face. So does the dog, the one that I don't have, who lazes at the razor edge of vision, whose curved shadow, when I'm still flat on my back, opening up like a gift the new morning clouds over me. The sister asks me to apologize for 1985 to 93. I screen all calls from the persistent bank. The baker calls. The baker wants her pie back. Even the fan, worrying the air from its perch on the ceiling, sucks breath from my lung. The future wants its diaper changed. I stroll it past the drooping wisteria to the Family Dollar, where I contemplate our next move. In the suburban zoo, we gawk at cages. We are surrounded by musical notes of bright weather. The panda turns its back on us like an unhappy god. I take the baby home. He'll live forever, I'm almost sure. He laughs like fire laughs, inexorable heat, blue flame unraveling. I have barely begun the day, I think, towards evening. The baby presses at my collarbone. You know what makes us happy? The whole world. We're swaying to a prelude by Ravel. We're waving goodbye to the Empire of Light. Our destiny is red, purple, and black. So, children in general, including my children, come in and out of, weave themselves through these poems. And my son, he's a great kid. He has some issues with processing and with speech, and he will twist the syntax of a sentence in a way that doesn't make sense sometimes, and he talks very fast, and he has a lot to say, and he's quite inarticulate, and it's something that has followed him, through life so far. And I'll just say the things that he says at the end of this poem, he said verbatim at the end of this poem in the way that it's described. Enunciation. The words I put in him, he troubles with and over, shifting in reverse the syntax of, as though a poet troubling the line with malaprop, but not a poet yet. He's 3. He's lived less time than most of the anxieties I've nursed for him. Please don't roll over on the other boy, I whisper from the ball pit's burbling edge. 3 years after he opened into the fluorescent, enunciative light of the extraction room, his eyes, I case the boiling pit's perimeter for his lit smile and fail to understand one thing he feels, this human foal, vortex of appetite, machine of noise, child who won't blow the softest sound into the penny whistle, this charming man who can't quite purse his lips to activate the bubble wand, tiny muscles refusing to hoist the necessary sails. The future promises countless encounters with useless specialists waving in his face wands, while tonight my son waddles out 3 hours after being put down, the muslin penguin pajamas sagging slack at the hip, to murmur to himself amid the assembled living room wreckage of miniature trains with trance-like clarity, his eyelids half glued. This is my whole life. This is my whole life, and my world too. Yeah. Where do we go? All right. In this poem, there are 2 children. and they're older. Ordeal. The creatures throwing bran muffin at me from the back seat of the Volkswagen SUV stop talking to themselves and now take turns becoming dinosaurs, their happiest of games. They are a torture I talked myself into, and as I ferry them, my favorites, I notice with my tongue that I have managed in my sleep to lose the sliver of one side of a premolar. Apportioning out, a judgment from the German Urteil, that which the gods dole out, one arduous deal. Most end up lucky never to have been marched barefoot like Kundiman of Luxembourg over red-hot plowshares, nor forced to swallow feathers and dry bread, nor made to carry through a hissing crowd the planks of wood their fate will nail them to, nor waterboarded. Most of us are lucky. Yet when we smile, we draw attention to the contours of the skull beneath uneasy skin, to the confusion polluting the eyes, startled like burghers in a painting by James Ensor, whose work makes clear what scared him in the tranquil afternoon. The dignified, deteriorating faces smiling into him as he traversed a bridge or saw a mirror and a skeleton inside. Myself, I prefer to retreat into the jellyfish dream factory of my open eyes as we traverse the span allotted, each hillside pedicured and tilled, a burst of starlings hurtling themselves in trapezoids at the clay sky above us, the brontosaurus, the triceratops, and me, who loves them, if love is the right term for what the stand of hollow trees feels toward its greening canopy, for how night rain scatters itself over the eager topsoil, for the extent to which I'm able to luxuriate in light, inhaling steam, though I suspect I am succumbing gradually to an identity deficiency, an overpowering lack of sense as I continue serving until it's time to ascertain if the accused will sink in innocence or obstinately float what's left of my life sentence with all of you beneath this wire and bird, amid the tangled shadows, root systems, a congeries of slate rooftops. Okay. This poem is probably both more and less autobiographical than what I've read so far. Autobiography. Attempted avoiding abysses, assorted abrasions and apertures, abscesses. At adolescence, acted absurd, acid, amphetamines, amorously aching, after an arguably arbitrary Abigail authored an awful obad. Am always arabesquing after Abigails. Am always afraid. An affliction? Animals augur an avalanche. Animals apprehend abattoirs. Am, as an animal, anxious. Appendages always aflutter. Am an amazing accident, alive. Attired as an apprentice aerialist, addressed acrophobic audiences. Aspiring as an adult after applause, attracted an angelic acolyte. After an affirming affair, an abortion. After an asinine affair, avowed agnostic, approached alone an abbey's altarpiece, asking alleged almighty about afterlife. Ambled adagio around an arena, admired an ancient aqueduct, ate aspic, adored and ate assorted animals, ascended an Alp, affected an accent, acquired an accountant, an abacus, assets, attempted atonal arpeggios. So more autobiographically, I left Russia when I was 5 years old. And by the time I was 6, we had moved to Buffalo, New York, where I spent like 2nd through 10th grade. And Buffalo is actually a really exciting city, but I don't think I knew that as a 2nd grader. And at the time, it was in really bad shape. This is the early 80s. It's the height of the Cold War, or on its way to being the height of like the 80s chapter of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and year after year, more and more factories are leaving the city, and the population is visibly shrinking. And I could tell because one of the schools in the district closed, and every year there would be fewer kids in the class than the year before. Flag Day. The flags flew in the wind, and I saluted. We'd just moved out, my family, the lot of us, from one country into another. I failed to understand the consequence. The flags clapped like the wind. I spent each yellow bus ride attempting to count toward infinity. My fellow children told me I was weird and couldn't speak their language skillfully enough for freeze tag. I replied, "You're welcome," meaning please. Dear freckle-dotted, bowl-haired adversaries who chased me merrily in tartan vests around the shrubbery, chanting USSR, go home in dissonant harmony. Where did you move, the lot of you? Each Flag Day, single file, we strutted through the playground with French horns and out-of-tune clarinets, some holding poles aslant like knights with spears, others saluting. Nostalgia is a pathological sickness. Photographed, I am as quiet as an apple approaching the mouth. In the pavilion of din, my skull stays a silence. The customs agent palmed the wedding ring my mother had neglected to declare, unfastened one gold Leo from a chain around her throat, and called it contraband. My mother clasped the thin residual chain, transporting it over meridians in her breast pocket. Flags danced drunkenly across a darkling field, unspooled their languid torsos listlessly into the limpid sky of possibility. I spent every quarter I palmed from my mother on yellow eggs in the store's prize machine. One had a plastic ring inside. I handed it to my impassive mother as she steered a cart overloaded with staples, detergent, Snapple. One heavy flag, unflappable, ginormous, bore down its shadow over her, then me, a consequence, a language, an infinity. And I think I'll just read two more poems. This poem is not where it said it was. Hold on. There it is. I feel like I very obsessively travel, and I always have this kind of like fear of missing out about travel, where I feel like I have to see everything, and I have to see everything while I'm traveling, even if I'm kind of disappointed by it as I'm seeing it, which happens a lot. And then and then whenever I hear that somebody is going to another like part of this country or to another country, I feel like, okay, when am I going to Brussels or whatever, right? And I keep thinking there's an answer in it, and I don't quite find it. And this poem largely takes place on a trip in Costa Rica. Pastoral. I was excited to see every sanctuary, jaguar, then sloth. The bright, fluted flowers, taller than any in central New Jersey, welcomed me along the periphery of the dusty byway. I spotted a kinkajou loping over a telephone wire as awkwardly as a three-legged cat in a Walmart parking lot. To find out what it was, I had to Google it. And even the blue jays, so common to me, were an epiphany here in the cloud forest. Surrounded by fronds and a network of curious bats angling toward me, I crossed a rope bridge over a crevasse as if in a special exhibit on tropics in the botanical gardens of Columbus, Ohio. On the bus between beaches, a whispering local offered each seat the chance to buy contraband turtle eggs. He was taken up in my memory eagerly. There was a great worry constantly radiating through my arms and my jawbone, a fire alarm going inside my chest I couldn't turn off, smelling the blood yield to smoke in my arteries. I was convinced I needed to find who I was, to make my life give my life the illusion of purpose. This is why I left behind everything, but the holiday destination with its swaying trees wouldn't tell me. So I Googled, who am I? And the predictive text, presuming I was searching for the lyrics to a mediocre song, suggested to be loved by you. Still, I felt grateful for the sudden glory of two morpho butterflies, as blue as the deep, God-summoning blue glass of Saint-Chapelle in Paris, where I remained a blur for a good hour once in hope of finding who I was, cavorting in a DNA-like figure eight before me as they mated guilelessly through the abundant silver air during their several weeks in existence. And I'm going to read a different last poem than I was planning to read, because I just feel like in this, I feel like for a very long time, but certainly in the last 7 years, we've had this incredible preoccupation with borders and with who gets to live where and what that means. And obviously in these last couple of weeks, we are all very preoccupied with borders, right? And as somebody who crossed one as a child, I think about this all the time. So I'm going to end here. This is not usually my last poem. Checkpoint. I crossed a border. I crossed a line. I crossed a threshold. I crossed the divide. I forded the strait between nowhere and wish. I shifted my body's weight in the direction of the sun. I was born in a well and began to crawl up toward a light in the muck. I believed I'd be well were I anywhere else, so I threw myself up, but nobody caught me as I dropped down, so I threw myself up every day for a life. The stone earth below me, my hard trampoline, a hiss in the throat telling me what I needed: to live in a bleached neighborhood in the shade of high trees that bounced their helicopter fruit against the breeze. So I believed a promise on the side of the imagined line I wasn't on, like softer bread or bolder shade of sky, a promise like another me with a changed name and posture, or I to cross the border, to cross the line, to cross the threshold, to cross the divide seared into the map in my head. So I spent my last coins on papers and gear, leaving my mother asleep in her chair as I rushed open-armed toward the door made of air that the gathering dust storm began to blow shut. My faith in nothing other than each breath, also invisible. Thank you.
Wow. Those countless hours with useless experts. And thanks for reading that last poem, even though that wasn't your normal end. I think we needed that. Thanks so much, Michael. Oliver de la Paz is the Poet Laureate of Worcester, Massachusetts for 2023 to 2025. He's the author and editor of 7 books: Names Above Houses, Furious Lullaby, Requiem for the Orchard, Post Subject of Fable, and The Boy in the Labyrinth, a finalist for the Massachusetts Book Award in Poetry. His newest book, The Diaspora Sonnets, was published by Liveright Press in the summer of 2023 and has just won the New England Book Award for Poetry, and you must have heard is included on the National Book Awards long list. Congratulations, Oliver. It's really great. A founding member, Oliver serves as the co-chair of the Kundiman Advisory Board. He has received grants from the NEA and NYFA, the Artists Trust of Washington, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and has been awarded multiple Pushcart Prizes. He teaches at the College of the Holy Cross and in the Low-Residency of the MFA program at PLU, and today at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. Thank you so much, Oliver, for being here.
Hi, everybody. Jennifer, thank you. Christina, thank you so much. And it's a real treat to hear you, Margaret and Michael. Love the new work. Fair warning, I'm just going to read a lot of daddy poems. I apologize in advance. So I'm going to start with an older book because it kind of feeds into the newer work. Years ago, my wife and I bought this property that abutted land that was owned by the Department of Natural Resources, in Washington State. It was on this beautiful spread adjacent to like 40 acres, 30 acres. And a year after we bought it, they clear cut it. I was so pissed off. But this is a poem about that. Meditation with smoke and flowers. It is Monday, and I am not thinking of myself. My son asleep in his stroller. The dark conifers holding nothing but their scent. I'm walking him to the place where loggers have cleared 30 acres, leaving only ash and stripped tree limbs. The lights now come to the places once dark, and now wildflowers, where once the moss grew thick and complete. The flame of something around the corner, and I'm thinking of the wild tiger lilies that line this gravel road below my house, how they clump together, their stems bent down from the weight of their flowers, how mouth-like they are, and how their speechlessness makes the road quieter. Each flower is a surprise, like the flaming tip of cigarettes in the dark. I think that the road cannot contain all these mouths, though there are mythologies held in check by the tongue. Like the story my father told me about his father in wartime, and how his own father forced him, with the threat of a beating, to go under the house for a cigarette from a Japanese foot soldier bunkered down. I can see my father's small, trembling hand outstretched to this man whose face is mud-caked, smelling slightly of fire and lubricant for his rifle. The smoke from the soldier's own cigarette takes the shape of the underside of the house, and I imagine my father can hear his own father above him pacing. But this road now is free of smoke. The logging trucks have taken off for the night, and the tree remnants have smoldered into nothing but charcoal. The wreck of everything is a vacuum. So too, the wreck of a village after war, or the floorboards above a son's head in fear of his own father. Here, though, there is nothing to fear. The wheels of the stroller on gravel is the only sound, and the idleness of the excavation trucks hearkens to someone asleep in the uneasy dark. No, I am not thinking of myself. I'm thinking of an agreement my father must have made with himself years ago when the houses were burning into bright bouquets in the nighttime. How perhaps he swore he would not beat his own son, while somewhere in the afterlife, his own father smokes and paces. Perhaps there are no flowers in that place. Perhaps the lone soldier, through with hiding, crawled out after the guns had stopped and dusted himself off, the sun striking his face with its unreasonable light. I'm thinking of my son, asleep, and of the wild tiger lilies, how frail they are in the new light, why they come, why they spring up unannounced, as suddenly as the promises we make with ourselves when we are young. So in 1972, just a quick overview about this book. 1972, Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. And my uncle on my father's side was blacklisted by Ferdinand Marcos's regime, mostly because he was a student who was leading some of these protests. And my father was paying for my uncle's education, and he was really worried about the family. And so he stood in line in this military camp called Camp Cramey for several days. The line was miles long, maybe about 2 to 5 miles long. It's different every time he tells the story. But it was a long line, and he waited days, and finally he just got fed up with waiting. And then he walked up to the front of the line and he threw his papers at the guy who's stamping the papers. He went home, got some lunch, came back, and the papers were stamped. And we left that day, with just very little. We ended up sort of crisscrossing across the United States, just going from one kind of bad housing to another kind of bad housing. My mother was a doctor in the Philippines, but she had to retrain herself when she moved to the United States. And sort of part of the deal was that she had to serve an underserved population, which is why we ended up in Eastern Oregon. And this is a poem about my father seeing Eastern Oregon for the first time. Diaspora Sonnet with my father in the desert, seeing the valley before him and nothing else. I imagined him to be God, seeming to birth a spring wind which rattled our mobile of spoons. Did he unearth books to guide us to this moment? And having read the books, their taboos and their secrets, did he hide their possible romances? And did he save nothing in his pocket, save justice and disaster, unpardoned by the creases in my palm? And having had his hands framed by a racket of bone, did the wreck of their meat tell us how to receive the wild fields? Did these systems, complicit in however we push through, have answers despite my father's outrage? I'm moving this poem up because of Michael's incredible closing poem. There was, wow, that was loud. There was an exhibit at the ICA in Boston, which was entitled "When Home Won't Let You Stay," and they commissioned me to write a poem for one of the exhibits. They just said pick an exhibit, and when you went to this exhibit, there was this gigantic map made by the Indian artist Rina Saina Kalat, and it was basically a map of the world that was composed entirely out of electrified barbed wire that was colored. And so this is a poem about that, which is also about borders and immigration. Pantoum beginning and ending with thorns. Because of the way a border on a map twists into thorns, my father stood in line in the ruined country with ruined men. We were footnotes on charred parchment, the boundaries lost at the precipice of a war, shifting on the hour in spliced histories. My father stood in line in a ruined country with ruined men, and what for? Did he imagine the desert he would bring us to? At the precipice of a war, shifting on the hour in spliced histories, the call to leave home throbbed inside him. Urgent pulses. And what for? Did he imagine the desert he would bring us to? Its thirsty and abandoned towns. There was a fire spreading within. The call to leave home throbbed inside. Urgent pulses crossed and uncrossed like tributaries on freshly inked maps. In thirsty and abandoned towns, there was a fire spreading within. So he took us away because the country was ruled by swords which crossed and uncrossed like tributaries on freshly inked maps. and the guns would sound all night like feast days of saints. He took us away because the country was ruled by swords and men emblazoned with chevrons and pins, and the guns would sound all night like feast days of saints. But really, there was more silence. There was worry and fear, and men emblazoned with chevrons and pins would draw black X's over places they'd conquered. Really, then more silence, then worry and fear. The flies would sing their hymnals in procession around the dead. The black X's over places now conquered. Maps of provinces, cities, family lines drawn and redrawn. The flies singing their hymnals in procession around the dead. And my father with a ticket to flee because home wouldn't let us stay. Maps of provinces, cities, family lines drawn and redrawn into travelogues and diaries, into stories passed in the night, like my father with the ticket to flee because home wouldn't let us stay. Hum of the plane engine, hum of idling car, hum of the outboard motor, into travelogues and diaries, into stories passed in the night. We were footnotes on a charred parchment, the borders lost to the hum of planes, of idling cars, hum of outboard motors, because of the way the line on a map twists into thorns. So we traveled around a lot, as I mentioned. And one of the houses that we ended up in while we were traveling, we spotted dead birds all over the house, which is never a good sign. And this is a poem about that. Diaspora Sonnet, Nesting in a Chimney. We said that love proliferated the way chimney swifts burrowed into the old attic insulation. We measured their generosity and their cries increased. We heard them in the day and called them our singers. We could not index them. Their service chiseled through the drywall, and then they'd rush through our living spaces, owning it all. We had rice, we had shirts, we had a roof with a choir. The long gush of their collective, full of thirst and want. Their calls cut through the ceiling, the gears of a machine that had already dug a long furrow into our seams. I was a latchkey kid, and I was babysat by television. I watched a lot of F Troop. Remember F Troop? Gilligan's Island, F Troop, Leave It to Beaver, and my mom was into All in the Family. She really loved Edith Bunker. But this is a poem about not seeing yourself on TV. Diaspora Sonnet on the glossy cover of TV Guide. Because we were not chosen for the dance, we scouted work parties, fast food, romanced in darkened rooms where loudly pool cues stalked us, angry broods with games of chance. We weren't chosen for the dance. With kings and senators, weird blades of grass, while luminaries, fat on roasted pig and ribs on spits, enhanced their looks with hair products that let them shine beautifully above us in orbit. Whole galaxies of the gorgeous on TV. To see them wear such luscious finery and shine like polished stones for want of love, for want of having been. And we tuned out the channels, cycled down, and felt the crash. You guys doing okay? So this is a poem about My father, who living in, so here, I'll just show you a map. This is Idaho. Does it look like Idaho? Right. This is Oregon. This is where I lived, where my family ended up. It's a little town called Ontario, Oregon. This is the part of Oregon that wants to become Idaho. And it tells you all about why I became a poet. But it's also gun culture. Like they have a big gun culture there. And my father, who's very much still alive, but is sort of obsessed with guns. It just kind of happened to him. It just kind of took him over. And this is a poem about the 4th of July, our first 4th of July, and 2 about his guns. Diaspora Sonnet on my father's guns. My father's rifle is a house of sorts. Its nerves are blunted, cold beneath the steel, and rooms echo with reports of noise, loud and boisterous hailstones, not bullets. The thing we flee from, rain and nature. The rifle makes a poor roof. He holsters it to him in fear of his body and the pains of imperatives from another country. The shelter's flimsy and flecked with sparks, ash and fireworks on display. July, dark to light. The open sky blooming, bouquets, my father's bewilderment. There are ghost lights seared into what had been seen, a weight as heavy as the gun my father cradles. I'm going to read 3 more poems. You remember writing letters. So basically from the 70s to the 80s, the only way that my family could communicate with their family was through these beautiful envelopes that had the blue and red stripes and the letters par avion. And this is a poem about that. And my father writing a letter to send money. Diaspora Sonnet sent par avion with an ink blemish from a broken pen. You bit the end off the fountain pen and blue terraced into the creases of your neck. Seeing the ink run across your Adam's apple to form an island there, rising at the surface of your voice. I am dizzy, so I look away. Yet hearing you, I know your throat rises at each swallow. To know air like that is to write it down and to understand belonging. I am here, and you are here, and we are separated only by air between us. Topography traversed by my eye, following the line of dye, chasing its tail from the lip edge to the knot in the language I'd forgotten. A lot of this book is imagined. I want to sort of put that out there that, when we left, my parents were in their 20s. In my 20s, I played Madden. And in their 20s, they were fleeing a country. And I just find it extraordinary. So in a way, I felt an obligation to mythologize, my family. And so this is a poem that sort of imagines my dad in his 20s. Diaspora Sonnet, imagining my father on the streets of Marikina, Metro Manila. My father in his 20s wears his press suit and carries a small hat box, possessing something sensible, something pleased with itself. And through the cacophony of the queued up industry of men coming home from work, my father is playing. Avenues of dust and motor trikes belch in umbrage to the poem of it. We might have stayed, my plain father, tired of the staccato of each adjectival commute, loamy, worn, blunted, and angry, plain as the possibility of wonder in a hat box, as sensible as the need to leave the country. He is the center of sense, my father, never hesitating to thread his Windsor knot and polish his one pair of dress shoes, because he will wear his hat, he will go, and thereafter we will live in his thereafters. And I'm going to close with another pantoum. And just for point of information, where we ended up is also called Big Sky Country. It's like a gigantic sky. Pantoum beginning and ending with a big sky. Wherever the horizon meets the plains, a sharp line cuts into my sight. Bursts of scrub and bare pine emerge from the earth like little prayers. Unheard breaths catch in scraps of wind. Here we are, cut into my sight. Bursts of scrub and bare pine hold us in the frame and place us closer to home. Breaths catch in scraps of wind. Here we are, monuments aligned with a certain perspective. Hold us in the frame and place us closer to home, if there's a home for us. Remember where we stand, monuments aligned with a certain perspective, perhaps from the side, perhaps just disappearing. If there's a home for us, remember where we stand so we can return to it. Trace our steps backward, perhaps from the side, perhaps just disappearing in my rear view. My father's arm on my headrest so we can return to it. Trace his steps backward, back from his working paces, back from the road in the rear view. My father's arm on my headrest as he puts the car in reverse, as he watches the mirror, back from his working paces and back from the road. I think he dreams of change, dreams of me as he puts the car in reverse and as he watches the mirror, imagines who I'd become or other possibilities. I think he dreams of change, of me, driving out of this desert, setting fire to the road, imagines who I'd become or other possibilities that are maybe just within reach off the interstate. I'd drive out of this desert and set fire to the road. I'd emerge from the earth like a prayer unheard. I'd take the off-ramp and ease off the interstate. I'd see where the horizon and the plains form a sharp line. Thank you all.
Thank you, Oliver. It's a three of you will come up here just for a couple of audience questions before we sign books. That would be great. Let me give this to Margaret.
That's a big responsibility. I've over here. I mean, you get questions.
I'm good.
And we're recording this for Zoom, so if you can speak into the mic whenever you're talking. I'll start with the festival, you guys think. We have a lot of people here working on their first collection. And if you could each give us a little bit of advice about, if you think back to putting your first collection together, what is the best piece of advice we could give to our students?
Sure. I think that, I would say, I want to tell you about the mistake I made in the first collection. This is a long time ago, but I felt a pressure to put my poems into sections. And I felt that because other people were doing it, and it seemed like there was some mysterious answer. And first of all, there's no answer to the order of your book, right? But there is the question of what do you want someone to read first and second and third? And in a way, you could imagine you were giving a reading of the 40 poems or whatever that you have. What order would you read them in? I mean, I think it's really a better way of thinking of it than should you put things together thematically or not thematically. And I feel like I had this kind of, I don't know, unpleasant review of my first book when it came out, though it was in a good venue, so I was almost grateful. But it said that the fourth section was worth the price of admission, and that was the heat. And and it shows you that like taste is somewhat, it's arbitrary. And I'd have, and reviewers would speculate as to why poems were in the sections they were in. I thought I had this whole idea. I didn't, and it was very liberating in a new book to really think of it as, well, what is the first stepping stone? Like, if this is like a staircase, right? How am I walking? Right. The other thing I would say is that the last line of your poem is the last line before your title or before the first line of your poem. And if you think of that as a kind of bridge, I really believe in having the last line of something get picked up in some way by the title of the first line afterwards. Not in terms of content necessarily, though that happens too, but in terms of just language, so that it feels, so there's a kind of dialogue between the two poems they get to like sit next to each other.
You said dialogue, and I think that that's always a key in my assembly of any book, that I view the works working dialogically, that they're in conversation with each other. So the first poem might be in conversation with the poem on page 37 in some way, shape, or form. I also always imagine the assembly of a manuscript to be akin to mounting paintings in a gallery space, and there's going to be that one painting that's going to draw you into the gallery, but like as you're walking through the gallery to get to that one painting, you're seeing the relationship of these pieces. Maybe they're line studies, maybe they're minis of what it is that is of larger concern at the end of the hall. So while there's that thing at the end of the hall that gets you into the gallery space, there's also all of these remarkable studies that have dynamic relationships with each other along the walls, right? And so I think that that's always a useful metaphor for me when I'm assembling a book.
This is my first book, so this is very recent for me. I think just something short I would say is that I had one or two poems that felt like sort of outliers, and I thought I was really worried I was gonna have to cut them from the book because they felt so weirdly different. One of them was one of the Wanda poems. And then one night I had insomnia and just wrote a bunch of poems around that poem, so that it could have enough space in the book and wouldn't just be this weird sort of hanging chat, and could have some friends. I think, and then there's the whole issue of submitting too, which is the order of poems that you have might be different in the book than you order them to submit. You might want like bangers to the front for submission, but because you've got to keep somebody reading. But I think what was more useful for me was thinking about what these two have said about like how the whole book talks to itself and how the poems speak to each other across the collection.
A question I've been thinking about was sometimes when I hear a poem as you say a poem as part of the title, you say sonnet, the phantom, all this, and I get locked into those things in my head, and then there are two things going on. I'm listening to the poem and reading it. I'm listening to the poem, but I'm also seeing how it form works And I don't know if that's a constant, because sometimes I'm thinking, maybe I should just write a poem and say what it is, because saying what it is gets in the way of people reading. So what's your thoughts on that?
So we just had a workshop about the sonnets, and I want to say that by saying the name of the form in front of the poem works as a kind of symbol, right? That I think that a lot of times it is important for the writer to identify that there is a particular form that is tied up to a tradition so that we can dispense with the conversation about it, right? That I think it's important to like say, okay, this is a sonnet. So immediately it's operational in your head that this is a sonnet, and if it fits or doesn't fit a particular tradition. And what is the complication then, right? Like, what is the complication that the poem invites when the writer says it's this, but in your mind, you have a particular sense of what a sonnet is? Well, I think in that tension or in that confrontation is the poem too. And that's part of why I'm doing that, right? That's part of why I'm inviting the reader to sort of think about or process, well, is it a sonnet? Is it in the tradition that I'm expecting? And what are my expectations? And what does that say about how I was trained as a writer? Those are all the things that I want you to think about as I announce that this is the title, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, all I would add, I mean, I tend not to do that. Like my default would not be to name the form of something. I'm trying to think if I ever have, but I feel like, but I have a very clear sense, I think, of what it does, or why it works when it works, or why my students sometimes do it. And I think it's actually saying, like I think you have to ask yourself, like, what is a title in the first place? And what is the purpose of a title? Well, it provides a lens through which you view the thing that you read. It may be a caption, and often is better served by not being a caption to the text, so it can be, right? And it's a way in, and it's a way of framing. And so I feel like, yeah, I think you're like, when Oliver, like when you read, I think, oh, so I'm going to listen for the repetitions of the pantoum, or this poem is going to be either 14 lines or rebel against that in some way, right? And I feel like what you're really accomplishing there is you're saying the form here matters, pay attention to the structure. And I think, to me, it's less of a distraction, more it's saying pay attention to the structure from the get-go. And I think that's it's an interesting way of, I don't know, of approaching a text. I haven't done it that often, I don't think.
I don't really have anything to add, because that was exactly what I was going to say. I think of it like, again, I don't do it a lot either, but when I read a lot of poems that do this, it feels like, especially if it's not like checking all the boxes of the form that you might see if you looked it up, it's calling in a kind of ghost of the form to be looking for.
Good evening, everybody. Kind of going off book questions. I'm interested in titles as well, and I think you all have like perfect book titles for your collection. I'm curious how you arrived at your book titles, and had you not titled it what you titled it, what would you title it?
Mine is a piece of a line from one of the early poems in the book, and I think I arrived at it because it's that Charlie Brown Good Grief thing. So I wanted this kind of sense that like tragedy is sometimes funny because it's so much. Or if you go out the other side of it, it becomes comedy or something like that. I guess for your other question about what would it have been otherwise, originally I had a bad title about gardens or something, because I was looking at some imagery that had happened over a lot of poems, and that felt too heavy-handed, so I had to let it go.
I think I really like, my first book, I was really haunted by a comment that caused me to like move away from, poems for a minute, which was that, a judge for a contest said, I would have chosen this book if the poems were what mattered most. But what matters most is having a book. And it's really like, did a job on me, right? And the judge said, you have 3/3 of 3 different good books. And that was, I mean, that was not something you say to someone, honestly. And it was said to me actually within weeks before someone else took my book, but I kept thinking about that and thinking I've written a hodgepodge, right? And took it too seriously. And I feel like it really mattered for me in this book to write, and it made it a much slower process, but to write it a poem at a time and to ask myself, what is it? And I feel like in a very central way, from the very beginning, it asked the question of like, what does it mean to be a creature? Like, what does it mean to be a creature in the world? You know, and there are poems where the creature is not a human creature. In many poems it is, in some poems it isn't. When I started writing the book, I did not yet have children, and I made myself a rule that children would wander in as creatures. I didn't know that was going to be the title, right? But I was thinking of them that way, and I noticed it's a word I use with my kids quite a bit when I think about them. Also, I'll add one more thing to that, something that can't come across in the book, but it's a really weird, the word for creature in Russian is существо. And it's the same, and it's the same word for substance. Like, it doesn't have to be animate. And it's also the word for, it's very close to the word for noun. Like, the root of it is the root for noun. And I don't know what that's about. And when I tried to ask my mother, she told me I was wrong, but I didn't understand why. Right. So, and but I was really just interested in like the idea of a created thing. I mean, the title comes from what ended up the first poem, and I use the word creature more than once in the book, but the title comes from the first poem where what the puppeteer says, that she makes these creatures. And I like the idea of starting with being a creature, because ultimately what you have at the beginning of a poem, you know, there's a blank page and a voice arises. And what does the voice say to you? Like, I am alive. I have been formed. I get to speak now, right? And so it was very conscious to have the word creature as the last word of the first line of the whole book. And then I think that one time it comes up for sure is in that poem Ordeal, where the children, which is really late to the end of the book, it's where they're hitting me with food in the car, and I use creatures to refer to them, and that's a very conscious move. In terms of what else I called it, I mean, nothing I really want to share, but I'm interested in one word titles, and something that occurred to me that I really disliked very early on. I thought, could Death and Sunlight be a title for a book? And I thought, it's the thematic preoccupation of the book. Like, I say it in the poem, but it's not right, you know. Squalor, I thought, could squalor be? I thought that's ridiculous, right? But that was years before it became creature.
So I'll answer your second question first, and the alternate title was Diaspora Sonnets, without the. I'm not trying to be cheeky or I mean, like, literally it was sort of already formed in my head that this is what it was going to be. But I will say that the titles of the individual poems changed drastically, that in publication, if you just Google them, they're all Diaspora Sonnet and then a number. And imagine trying to assemble a manuscript with Diaspora Sonnet and then a number. My God, it was terrible. And so I just basically took a whole summer to just sit down and just figure out, how am I trying to orient a reader, and what is my relationship going to be with a reader. So I just figured, okay, I kind of got to set up the ship so that it can find land and have some kind of fixed navigational point, so that, you know, we can triangulate and bring a reader to shore, if that makes sense. So I think philosophically, when I think about titling conventions, I think about that. I think about triangulation, and how is it that I can put up some idea that will help navigate a reader into some harbor. I think.